Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second round of the 2020 Virtual Wheat Field Day, hosted by the Department of Agronomy at Kansas State University. I'm your moderator for this evening, Erick Atkinson, also serving as the host of Agriculture Today, the daily radio broadcast on agriculture from K-State, and coming to you from the K-State Radio Network studio in Dole Hall here on the campus. Glad to have you along with us this evening as we continue the program that was launched last evening. Want to point out the aim of this event. As many of you are well aware, with the advent of COVID-19, such in-person events as wheat tours were basically put aside. And therefore, no K-State wheat tours have been taking place, nor wheat field days for that matter. So, as a substitute for that, we are hosting this program, started last evening, continuing through this evening, and passing along information on wheat production, wheat development, and other matters relating to wheat management during these sessions. Recapping last evening's program briefly for you, for it is archived on the YouTube channel for your viewing. Last night, we heard from K-State wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato about wheat variety selection principles. We also heard from K-State's Erick DeWolf and Kelsey Andersen on the wheat disease situation in Kansas to date. And K-State's Lucas Haag was specific on variety selection for the western parts of Kansas. Again, if you'd like to see yesterday's session, you can go to the YouTube channel and simply search for K-State Wheat Field Day. You'll find it right there. Here's what we have coming up for you this evening, then. In a few moments, we'll hear from K-State wheat breeder Allan Fritz, and he'll be sharing the latest on wheat variety development and advances, particularly for central Kansas growing conditions. Allan will be followed then by fellow K-State wheat breeder Guorong Zhang. He's based at the Agricultural Research Center at Hayes for the university, and he'll be taking the same tack, looking at wheat variety development and advances for western Kansas. Later on, we'll bring in K-State area agronomist Stu Duncan, and he will concentrate on variety selection for the central part of the state, some principles to consider there. And we'll round out our program hearing from the Vice President for Research and Operations with the Kansas Wheat Commission, Harries. And Aaron will be talking about wheat research that is sponsored at K-State by the Wheat Commission and some of the things that are going on and are developing in that arena. So that's what's happening over the next couple of hours. We'd remind you this is an interactive session. We're welcoming your questions, which will be answered toward the end of the program during a discussion panel segment of this broadcast. If you'd like to pose those questions, it's as easy as a couple of venues. YouTube chat, if you would tap into that. You can also log your question on Twitter at KSU Wheat. Again, the address on Twitter at KSU Wheat, or you can email K-State's Romulo Lollato. He's standing by to take in all of those questions through all of those venues. You can email him at this address, lollato@ksu.edu. Spell that out, Lollato @ksu.edu. Again, we'll be holding onto those questions as we go, and we'll address them at the end of the program. But by all means, as questions come up, please do bring them to our attention, and our panel will be more than happy to answer those for you. Without any further ado, let's go to our first presenter. He is the wheat breeder based on campus for Kansas State University, Allan Fritz, and we've invited Allan to talk some about the variety breeding advances and progress we're seeing for for central Kansas growing conditions. So we'll hand it on over to Allan now. Allan?
Thanks, Erick. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be able to join everyone tonight. This beats writing another COVID-19 response plan. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to communicate and talk a little bit about what's going on in the breeding program at Manhattan. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our older varieties, then talk about a couple of the new things that are coming that we're looking at releasing probably this summer. And then I'll spend a little bit of time at the end just kind of talking about some of the general things that are going on in the breeding program, directions that we would like to go for the future, and highlight just a few of those things. So we'll start with just kind of going through some of the varieties. We'll start with an old one, Everest. It's been around obviously for quite some time. We released it in 2009, led the state in acreage for a number of years. So I do think that Everest still has some application in the state. It's obviously declined in acres, but there are some fairly unique things about Everest that still make it applicable in certain situations. So it's an early variety, really it's a very early variety, so it can get dinged a little bit in freezes, although I will say of the early things, Everest does seem to tolerate the freeze better than other early maturing varieties. There's usually a pretty good relationship between maturity and freeze damage when we get these late spring freezes, but Everest tolerates it better than you would expect based on its maturity. But still, we saw some damage with it in areas with the freeze this year. Really, the two calling cards on Everest that still are really important are its response to fusarium head blight. I still feel as though it's really as good as anything that's available to our producers for dealing with fusarium. It's really more of an intermediate to moderately resistant variety, but it does really hold up fairly well to fusarium. And as I said, it's probably as good as we have available as varieties for dealing with those fusarium situations. It's also BYDV tolerant. It's probably not really a true resistance. You will see some disease in the field, but it really responds to BYD better than the vast majority of varieties that are out there. There are a few others. There are some things like Duster and some of those sort of things that have some good tolerance, but Everest gives us some protection to BYD. So in combination, that really, I think, makes it still a good fit, particularly in southeast Kansas, where we want to go double crop and put some beans in so that early maturity gets Everest off the field early. We have a lot of BYD in southwest or southeastern Kansas, and we also see a fair bit of fusarium head blight. So those are good traits for those situations. One of the remarkable things about Everest is we've talked about breeding for durable resistance to leaf rust for a long time. We accidentally released a durably resistant variety in Everest. It's held up throughout its entire release period, and we've been working on mapping the resistance on that and moving it into other things because it's been a durable form of resistance. It's been a consistent performer, tolerant on acid soils. The things that we usually are concerned about with Everest, the main one would be stripe rust. So stripe rust is going to be a concern, and you would need to protect it from stripe rust in order to not lose significant yield potential on it. And the quality on it is marginal. So we've taken our fair shots on the quality side of it. I did want to talk a little bit about where we are on the rust diseases right now. We had some race changes to stripe rust last year. Honestly, I think we've seen them for a couple of years prior to that, but we saw some changes for both leaf and stripe rust. So there's really a pretty limited set of varieties that are truly resistant to both leaf and stripe rust. And so I think there's really going to be a need to manage disease in those. And I think coming back to a variety like Everest, having good leaf rust resistance, you can get that fungicide on fairly early and deal with the stripe rust piece of it. And then even if that fungicide sort of loses its efficacy at the end of the grain fill period, the genetic resistance will take over and you'll be able to protect the crop that way. So some of these varieties that are resistant to one or the other give us some good management tools to deal with some of the variability that we're seeing in the rust pathogens. The next one I'll talk about is Larry. We released this one at the same time we released Zenda. It's a medium late maturing variety. It's holding up relatively well for stripe rust. Bob Bowden with the USDA unit and Mary Gutierrez also with the USDA operate a stripe rust screening nursery at Rossville. And we saw the new races there. And while Larry had eroded a little bit, it still was pretty good in those conditions. So I think the stripe rust resistance on it is not as strong as it once was, but it's still pretty effective. And I think in most situations, it'll still be a pretty effective level of resistance. For us, it's been a very consistent performer. It's really just been one that really hasn't fallen apart for us. So it's been a really good, consistent line. It's acid soil tolerant, good tillering capacity. It does have some tolerance to wheat streak. It's not as good as, say, a Joe or something like that, which has true resistance. Larry's more like a 6. It's sort of the tolerance that we used to see in things like Jagger. But Larry has done pretty well going west, particularly into southwest Kansas. And I would say I think it looks pretty good out that way this year. So maybe a little bit earlier than some of the options that you would normally have for southwest Kansas. but probably best at home in south central Kansas, but has done well throughout the central part of the state. I would say our performance on Larry has been very, very similar to a little bit better than SY Monument. And so that it's been a solid performer. The things that we were concerned about on it are leaf rust. So it is susceptible to leaf rust. And I think where producers have been disappointed with it is probably when they haven't applied a fungicide. So unlike Everest, where you would want to get that fungicide on at the very early part of the window in order to take care of stripe rust and let the genetic resistance to leaf rust take over, here you would want to get the fungicide application on a little bit later and trust that that stripe rust resistance is going to hold for a little bit, and then put that fungicide on just a little bit later in the window so that it's effective longer in the grain fill period. Those fungicides usually last for about 21 days, which is a little bit longer than our grain fill period. So if you can if you had Everest and Larry, you'd put your fungicide on Everest first and then come and get the Larry. Things that I've noticed over the years on Larry is it does show a little bit more symptoms from barley yellow dwarf. Barley yellow dwarf is kind of a strange disease to rate. There isn't necessarily a super strong correlation between symptoms and yield loss. And I've seen more yellow leaves on Larry than I would like. It's not certainly as bad. It's not truly as susceptible, but it's probably shows a little bit more symptoms than I would like, but it really hasn't seemed to hurt it very much yield-wise in those situations. So I'm not sure that it's really a susceptibility, but you may see a little bit more barley yellow dwarf on Larry in those situations. Scab resistance on Larry is sort of intermediate, probably intermediate to moderately susceptible. It's better than a lot of things, but it's not as good as Everest and Zenda and WB 4269, SY Benefit, and that class of varieties. And so it can tolerate some fusarium, but it isn't your best choice for a high fusarium situation. The next one I'm going to talk about is the first two are marketed through the Kansas Wheat Alliance. This one is actually marketed through Syngenta, though it is a release from our program. It's Bob Dole. The attributes of Bob Dole is it's early. That's going to hurt it some this year. Got dinged in the freezes, where the freezes were an important part of the cropping cycle. But that early maturity can also sometimes be an advantage. It is a tall variety, but it has pretty good lodging resistance. So I would say for us, what we've normally seen is it's going to lodge about like Monument. So if Monument's going to start to go down, Bob Dole's going to start to go down. And if Monument's going to stand, Bob Dole's probably going to stand. Has good acid soil tolerance. It's had good leaf rust resistance. That seems to be holding, although we have seen traces of leaf rust resistance on it, or leaf rust on it the last couple of years, but it's not been very frequent. It does have good quality. It's a top forage producer. The Oklahoma data would show that in fall forage, this has been the top line over the last 3 years. And so it does get out of the ground quickly and produces a fair bit of fall forage. It doesn't have either of our major dwarfing genes, and that's probably the reason that we see that fall forage production on Bob Dole. Our concerns on Bob Dole with this change in races of stripe rust, we're seeing some heterogeneity. So in other words, the variety is now a little bit mixed. It looks to be about 50-50, highly resistant versus relatively susceptible. So there probably will be some advantage in getting a fungicide on Bob Dole for stripe rust, even though not all the plants in the variety are susceptible. And that height always has concerned me. It can lodge under high yielding conditions. So management with a growth regulator, if you're really worried about that, or there are some situations if you're just really expecting really high yields, that maybe Bob Dole isn't the right choice because of that lodging potential. So for us, it's been a really, really good variety. I think the biggest weakness is probably just that early maturity can cause it to get bit a little bit in spring freezes. I guess my caution to producers would be that it's very seldom in Kansas that we say, man, this year really reminded me just like last year. Usually we're talking about it, look, this reminds us of 2007 or whatever. So in variety selection, I'd just be careful not to overweight the last year. Sometimes we can focus on that. And we really kind of need to look at the longer term performance and make those decisions based on historical performance. The next one is Zenda. This is a variety that we've had out for a few years now. Its attributes are it's a medium early variety. Again, probably got dinged a little bit in the freeze this year. Not probably, it did. It's intermediate to moderately resistant to fusarium head blight. Very similar to Everest. if I had to separate them, I would say maybe Everest is very slightly better on fusarium than Zenda, but it's very similar fusarium resistance. It's bred from Everest, and so very similar level of fusarium resistance. Leaf rust resistance is good. It does, if you go out there at the very, very end of the year, you will see a lot of leaf rust on it, but it really holds until the very end. So we have most of that leaf rust package from Everest, but we probably didn't get quite all of it. But it seems to be economically an effective level of resistance and giving us really good protection. It's performed well without fungicide. So Zenda in our data, and I think Romulo has some data as well, that really shows Zenda as the top yielding line if you really didn't want to apply a fungicide. My caution on that right now is the new stripe rust races do proliferate on Zenda. So we will need to protect Zenda in stripe rust situations or risk significant yield loss. And so that's disappointing, but it's the hazard of breeding wheat varieties and dealing with highly variable pathogens. So just producers should be aware at this point, we've kind of treated Zenda as something you can throw out there and not necessarily worry about it a lot, but we do need to consider a fungicide application on Zenda. A little bit like Everest, if you protect it from the stripe rust, that leaf rust resistance is going to protect you at the end though. So that's something to keep in mind. It is acid soil tolerant. It has better quality than Everest. We're kind of in the average to slightly above average quality level with Zenda. So it gets away from some of those concerns that the milling and baking industry has expressed. The other concerns I've talked a little bit about the stripe rust side of it. That's probably the biggest thing. The other year where Zenda probably didn't do consistently as well as I would have expected was 2018. And that was a historic drought year. And so we are moderately susceptible to drought. I think the vast majority of years in central Kansas, that's not really a problem. The other thing that's kind of different than Everest is it still does rely somewhat on fall tillering, but it does seem to have more spring tillering capacity than Everest. Everest was very heavily dependent on its fall tillering capacity. So I think that gives Zenda a little bit of an advantage in situations where we get planted a little bit later. So it's done pretty well in situations like no-till after beans. Also has better tan spot and leaf spotting reaction than Everest. So those are the varieties that we have out there that are in the market that are coming out of our program. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the things that are coming. These are varieties that we're likely to release this July or August. The first one is KS09 049K8. The parentage on this is Duster and Overlay with a little bit of a spring wheat from Simmet thrown in called Amadina. It's a medium early variety, and this is really kind of the culmination of our effort to breed race nonspecific for leaf rust resistance. We kind of accidentally got it in Everest. We intentionally got it in this variety. So this really holds up very well to leaf rust, and we really fully expect this to be durably resistant to leaf rust, or at least we certainly hope so. It's moderately tolerant on acid soil. If you've heard me talk about this line before, you might have heard me say intermediate, but we had a really good look at it on our acid soil site this year, and it's better than intermediate. I would say, you're on a pH 4.1 soil, you might want to think about something else, but really it's going to hold up pretty well in most of our acid soil sites. And so good on acid soils, very good tillering capacity. If those of you who remember Duster, it's extremely high tillering. This doesn't quite get to that capacity, but Overly was sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. And I would say it's closer to Duster than it is to Overly, and that's resulted in good yield potential. The quality on it is good. And then the other thing that I like about it is it does have some Hessian fly resistance. Hessian fly isn't always a huge issue, but it's nice to have some options out there to deal with Hessian fly. Our primary concerns would be it's moderately susceptible to stripe rust. So these genes that give us durable resistance to leaf rust also work on stripe rust, but they're just not quite as good. So they don't give us as strong a resistance. So I would say on this line, the resistance is good enough to give you a broader window for fungicide application. It's not going to flame out on you really quickly, but you will have enough stripe rust, and I would put it in the moderately susceptible category, that if it's a stripe rust kind of year like this year is in many places, that you would definitely want to put a fungicide on it. Again, you do have probably a little bit broader window, but again, sort of like Everest, if you deal with that stripe rust side of it, you have good genetic resistance to leaf rust on the back end. So you don't have to really worry about whether that fungicide is going to going to kind of fizz out on you a little bit at the end. It is susceptible to fusarium. Both Duster and Overly were susceptible. It's probably not quite as susceptible as either one of those, but I definitely would not plant this no-till after corn. In terms of names, the one we're kind of thinking about is KS Hatchet, but we haven't made a final decision on that. That would be to recognize Jim Hatchett, who is a USDA entomologist in Manhattan for a long, long time and contributed greatly to wheat breeding in the plains. The next one that we'll probably release this year is KS12DH0156-88. The name we're sort of thinking about on that is KS Ahern, and that's because this is bred from Gallagher out of Oklahoma by a K-State experimental. So we're gonna say that Ahern's much better venue, was a much better basketball venue than Gallagher. So we're gonna think about Ahern as a variety name for this. But this is a late maturing variety. It's honestly later than I really like, but it's continued to perform well. It has effective levels of leaf and stripe rust. So I'll show some data in a couple of minutes. It does seem to respond to some fungicide application, and there can be a physiological effect. But we have pretty effective levels of resistance to both leaf and stripe rust on this. This one truly is more intermediate on acid soils. So if you're getting into some fairly low pH soils, I might lean to something else, but it will handle pHs down to at least the 5 level and maybe a little bit below that reasonably well. So the quality on it is good. It's not great, but it's good. It has higher end yield potential. This one's been a bit of a racehorse for us. It's done really well, which is sort of the Gallagher history as well. Even though it's later, and I would normally say later fits better north, this has actually been better in south central Kansas. And I think there's, I don't know, it's not really winter tender, but Gallagher loses a few more tillers as you move north as we get a colder winter. And I think I see just a little bit of that in this line. So its historical performance has been better in south central Kansas than in north central. I messed up on my slides. It is not moderately susceptible to stripe rust. I should have taken that off of there. I built this slide off of the 049 slide. So ignore that piece of it. It is susceptible to fusarium. So again, we don't have a lot of fusarium resistance in this one, so not probably your best choice going after corn. I was just going to show a little bit of some yield data. And so just to explain a little bit what this is, I have the checks on the left-hand side, Zenda Monument and WB 4269, and then whether that check was treated or untreated, and then the comparison variety. And then under number, that's the number of site years that go into that comparison. So for instance, Bob Dole has yielded 110% of Zenda in untreated sites, and we have 19 of those site years. So over 19 experiments where they've been in the same experiment where they've been untreated, Bob Dole's been 110% of Zenda. It's been 106% of Zenda under fungicide. It's been 116% of Monument on 19 site years untreated. It's been 106% of Monument in 62 site years where we've had a fungicide treatment. It's been 127% of 4269 untreated. We only have 9 site years in that. So just interpretation of that. Last year, 4269 got quite a bit of leaf rust. We had a pretty heavy leaf rust year. Most of those 9 site years were last year. And so that really kind of skews that data a little bit. But if it's in a dark green, that means it was significant at the 1% level. The medium green is significant at the 5% level, and there's actually no light greens on this one. So 104% of 4269 treated under fungicide. If we look at 049K8, we've been very similar to Zenda, which is actually really impressive because Zenda has been really good untreated, and 49K8 has some vulnerability to stripe rust. But it's been 109% of Zenda in 25 site years when we've treated it with a fungicide. It's been 109% of Monument when we've treated it with a fungicide. So it's done really well. 109% of 4269 in treated sites as well. 113% of 4269 in 9 site years there. So if we look at the 15688, again, compared to Zenda, very, very similar yield to Zenda untreated. Again, that's really good. Zenda's been difficult to beat when we haven't treated it. But been 107 and 106% of Zenda and Monument treated over our years of testing. So again, that's drugged down just a little bit. The reason those numbers are slightly lower than for 049K8 is that 15688 hasn't done quite as well in north central Kansas. I would say 049K8's been really good in north central, throughout the central corridor. It's done very well after soybeans. And so that's just some of the yield data just to kind of show you where we're at and what our historical performance is. Things like Bob Dole probably won't stand up to that standard this year because of some of the freeze damage, but still a very strong variety historically. I wanted to wrap up by just talking about a few of the things that are going on in the breeding program other than just those variety releases. We've been working on winter durum for a number of years. We really have been working on it for almost 20 years at this point. Really wanted to kind of keep it quiet for a while and just work on it quietly until we could get it to the point where we thought that there was some potential there. We have a line that's on increase for potential release in 2022. It's yielded very similar to Joe in limited irrigation environments out west. And so we think the agronomic performance on it is very good. We've had an industry partner take a look at it for a couple of years, and the quality is in the realm of what they're looking for. It meets all of their expectations in terms of quality. So we're really excited about the potential of releasing that. The reason that we've been interested in durum is really, if you look at the durum industry, there's the desert durum in the desert Southwest, all irrigated. It seems like that has a limited lifespan, that water is probably not going to be used for growing wheat into the future. And so there's an opportunity there because that durum will probably go away. And when we compare ourselves to eastern Montana, western North Dakota, on up into the Canadian prairie provinces, we have fewer issues with fusarium in western Kansas. And so we can get away from some of the disease issues. We also have an advantage. Eventually, we get to a point of export where we have accessibility to the Gulf and export markets. And so normally durum will trade for somewhere around 50 cents to $1 a bushel more than common wheat. And so if we can combine that with some transportation advantages, we feel like there's some real opportunity there for producers to grow something with a little bit higher value that will fit on some of those fields where we need to cut back on our watering. And if we can put on what we've been putting on, Lucas Haag has been working with us, and Rob Aiken out at Colby, applying about 4 inches of water per year. And so we're getting yields in the 90 to 95 bushel area with that kind of irrigation regime. So we think it's a good mitigation strategy for some of our water issues out west and gives us something with a little bit additional value with some growth potential because of other issues that are going on in the durum world. And so we think that that's an opportunity going forward. One of the other things that we've spent quite a bit of time working on over the last 5 years is working with wild relatives. So the Kansas Wheat Alliance has funded us to work on Aegilops taschii, which has donated the D genome of wheat, and Triticum dicocoides, which is the wild emmer or the wild durum wheats. I should say on the durum, it's the pasta wheat. You make macaroni and spaghetti and those sort of things out of durum. So it's a different species than common wheat. And so in working with these wild relatives, the dicocoides is native to Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, on up into Turkey. We're excited about what's in these materials. For instance, the dicocoides goes up to 30% protein. The wild things can have up to double or have a lot more antioxidant capacity than our common wheats. They can be higher in iron, higher in zinc. So we think that there is some opportunity down the road to develop these into more healthful products and really hit sort of a novel quality health market, again, to differentiate and create additional value. We will still continue to develop commodity class wheat varieties, and we think that that's important. But we also think for the wheat industry, we really need to find some things that drive value and where we're not just producing bushels, where we're really trying to find areas where we can create value that goes all the way through the chain and benefits the producer, benefits the miller, benefits the baker, benefits the end user. And so we're excited about the materials. I'm really impressed by the way they look. For crosses onto wild relatives, they look pretty amazing. It's been a pleasure to work with Edward Ockenoff and Jesse Poland and Mary Gutierrez and a whole group of really talented wheat geneticists at K-State that have worked with us on different aspects of this. And we're excited about what it can do for the future. Breeding is a long-term process. It's 11 years from cross to release. Bringing something out of the wild relatives into an adapted variety isn't going to happen overnight, but we feel it's important to start these processes and get these things moving forward so we have the opportunities in the future. Just want to wrap up by thanking Kansas Wheat, the Wheat Commission, Kansas Wheat Alliance, really through the producers of Kansas. You've been supporting our program, and consider an honor to work for the producers of Kansas. And having grown up on a farm in Southwest Nebraska, production agriculture is near and dear to me, and I really appreciate the opportunities that we're afforded to work for our producers. So, I think there'd be opportunity for questions, and be happy to answer them when we get to that point. So thank you.
Fine review there, Allan. Thanks. It's always enthusing to hear about those new variety releases as they're coming down the pipe. And again, if anybody has any questions about those, about existing K-State releases and their performance, as Allan took a look at there, why, file those questions any of several ways. The YouTube chat is one, on Twitter at KSU Wheat, or again, you can email Romulo Lollato, who's waiting in the wings to receive those questions, at Lollato, Lollato, at ksu.edu. So Allan shared information about those varieties that would thrive normally in central Kansas. We want to take it now to the western part of the state, and a similar observation there. Zhang is the wheat breeder at K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes, and we're going to ask him to provide the latest on present and future varieties that he's been working with. So, Guorong, thanks for being with us, and take it away.
Okay, thanks, Eric, for the introduction, and I would be also feel very appreciated to have this opportunity to talk our views. And today I'm going to just talk about several varieties from my program in Hayes. And actually, let me play my slides. So I'm going to talk about the 8 varieties, and actually one of them, KS15H137, is a potential release this year. So actually 7 varieties plus 1 potential release, and 5 of them are red and 3 are white. So I'm going to start with the red first. So the first red I'm going to talk about is Oakley Seal. It was released in 2013. It's been quite a few years. It was released for Western Kansas, particular. It's a 1 gene clear field weight. We know clear field weight is something that can, it's very good for the field, that if you have the grassy weeds hard to control, like cheatgrass and rye and the joint goat grass. So this Oakley Seal, actually, beside that, clear field trait also has it's a very good yield, and the yield is actually, it's been have good yield records in the performance test, because it's been like 7 years in the performance test. So I just have a table here. It's a head-to-head comparison for this variety and against the other varieties. I listed a broad seal. It's also a clear field weight, and then 2 very popular variety in the West, Greenfield and T158, and then other 3 also popular variety in the West, but they are released almost the same time as the Oakley Seal. We can see, so those data from the Kansas Wheat Performance Test, I didn't actually calculate it because I got them from the database created by the Colorado wheat breeder Scott Haley. He compiled all the performance data from Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Nebraska, and so if you go, it's going public. If you go to his website, you choose the variety you want to compare, and also choose the region you want to see. Then it'll come out the test result, the average. So I am just interested in Northwest in Kansas and the Southwest Kansas. So I put this into the 2 column. You can see Oakley Seal had about 5 bushels yield advantage over broad CO, both in northwest and southwest Kansas. And Oakley CO also have yield advantage over T158 bird and LCS mint in both northwest and southwest region. And compared with the TEM114, that's a 1 year later release from Texas. So we can see the northwest is kind of similar yield, but in the southwest actually have about over 5 bushels yield advantage for Oakley seal. The only variety that Oakley seal has less yield is Greenfield. Both regions has about 1 to 2 bushel less. So it is very competitive yield in the West. And this is a medium late and medium tall variety. It has a medium long coleoptile length, and that means you can plant deeper to get more moisture when if the planting time is the ground is very dry. So this is an advantage for the Western Kansas. And it also another main advantage is its resistance to the wheat streak mosaic virus and stripe rust. That two diseases are the two major diseases in the West. And it also has a good milling and the baking quality, so that the industry actually liked it, the quality. The only concern is about the average straw strength. And so in the high yielding environment, it will lodge. So actually you don't want to put too much nitrogen or put it in the intense management. So the next one is Tatanka. The Tatanka was released 3 years later after Oakley CO. This is a regular weight variety. So it is a medium maturity, medium height. It has a good test weight. The yield is actually way improved compared to Oakley CO. Here's the performance data, same thing I got from the database. If Tatanka compared with Oakley CO in the last, it just calculates if the both variety in the same trial. So it's actually about 4 years performance test. We can see both northwest region and southwest region, Tatanka have about 5 bushels yield advantage. So the yield is improved compared to Oakley CO. And also Tatanka compared to other varieties, it's very, very, it's very good yield. If you compare to other popular variety here, T158 and in northwest region almost have 10 bushels yield advantage. Southwest Tatanka have about 7 bushels yield advantage. Also, if compare with the most popular Western variety Greenfield, you can see the northwest Tatanka still have 7 bushels yield advantage. Although the southwest region are close, they are very similar to each other. Then also I listed the Langing, Everly, and then TEM114. Those three are just released almost the same time as Tatanka. We also see the yield advantage. The Tatanka have yield advantage against the Langing, but 4 bushels yield advantage over Langing in both regions. Then Everly, compared with Everly, actually have more yield advantage for Tatanka. And then also it has also yield advantage over TEM114 in both regions. So it's a pretty good yield, So, and then it also has good resistance to stripe rust. Although the leaf rust may be a little bit, weak. It's about just intermediate. It has also intermediate reaction to barley yellow dove virus. And it also has a good milling and the baking quality. So the industry also like its quality. So the straw strength, it's also it's just about similar as Oakley CO. It's a high yielding environment where lodging, and it's susceptible to wheat streak though. So it need to be careful when you're planting. Need to be take care of the volunteer around your field or in your field. Those, so recently we released another two red varieties. One is called KS Dallas. So the KS Dallas, the line number is here 15H116. This pictures come from actually last year, the foundation seed field in Kobe. It is medium maturity and the medium height is just similar as Tatanka. And the coleoptile length is kind of medium long. It's kind of similar as Oakley CL. It is a very good yield, and compared to Tatanka, actually we also improved a little bit. Here is our internal data from last 3 years, the elite test data. We can see in the 3-year average, actually, this KS Dallas had about 2.5 bushels yield advantage over Tatanka, and it has about 7-8 bushels yield advantage over the Greenfield. And so last year, this variety is the first year in the Kansas performance test. It is the #1 top yield in northwest region locations. If I average them together, it will be the top yield. And the southwest region, actually, it's not the top one, but in the top yielding group. So it's a very good yield. And also, I'm excited about this variety is about its wheat streak mosaic virus resistance. We improved this wheat streak mosaic virus resistance compared to Oakley CL because wheat streak mosaic virus resistance is temperature sensitive. So Oakley CL, the resistance in Oakley CL will break up if the temperature above 18 degrees Celsius. But this one will hold the resistance until 20-21 degrees Celsius. I believe this one it has a WSM2 gene, just as Oakley has, but it might have some other minor genes involved, so it has a higher temperature resistance. And also, we found out this one also has an intermediate reaction to the triticale mosaic virus. Triticale mosaic virus is another virus that causes the wheat streak mosaic disease. So wheat streak mosaic disease was caused by 3 viruses. One is wheat streak mosaic virus. The second one is the triticale mosaic virus, and then another is high plain virus. So wheat streak mosaic virus is, it's a majority in the population cause the mosaic disease. But also we have certain portion of the virus is triticale mosaic virus will cause this disease. So so this variety has a very good high temperature wheat streak mosaic virus resistance plus the intermediate resistance to the triticale mosaic virus. So that means it will provide better protection from those viruses than the Oakley CL. And this one, this variety also have a good leaf rust resistance, but the stripe rust resistance in the past early years seems like the moderator resistance, but until last year, because maybe the race change or something, it has kind of more symptom come up. I call it intermediate reaction. So I think maybe you want to put some fungicide to manage the stripe rust. And it is a medium, intermediate to barley yellow dwarf virus. So this one has a good baking quality. The straw strands almost similar as Tatanka or Oakley steel. We haven't improved a lot, but will be good variety for the West. Western Kansas. So next one is that's also the KS Western Star. It's almost released the same year as KS Dallas. It's a new one, and maturity and height is similar as Dallas and Tatanka. And this one has a good test weight. The yield, I just have that table showed you actually also listed the Western Star. Our own data showing it's very similar to Dallas, about 2 bushels yield advantage over Tatanka. And we can see this variety actually in the dry year actually it had more yield than the KS Dallas. And 2018 is a very, we can consider it as a dry year. So this one actually Western Star has had about 4 bushels more than Dallas. So it has more drought tolerance for this variety. And last year it was also in the Kansas performance the test in West. Actually, it is a top yield in the southwest region, and then in the northwest region, actually, I think most of locations still is in the top yield group. So it's very competitive variety in the west. And also we also found that this variety also did well in some place in central Kansas, like Ellsworth and Hutchinson and the Manhattan area. And I think it might fit some area in central Kansas. So we can see that this variety actually have a good disease package. I will continue about its how this react to the disease. Actually, it has a resistance to the wheat curl mite, and actually wheat curl mite is a vector of the virus that's vector of the virus, the 3 viruses that cause the wheat streak and mosaic disease. So it kind of like it's another way to provide the resistance to those, to wheat streak mosaic disease. So, and also it also has intermediate reaction to the triticum mosaic virus. So you add these two together, I think we'll have pretty good protection, provide a very good protection from those mosaic virus disease. And so this is important. This is very important for Western Kansas. So, and we can see, we can tell also this variety also have moderate resistance to both stripe rust and leaf rust, and it has resistance to the soil-borne mosaic virus. That is very important in central Kansas. So, and it is intermediate to scab and Barry-Yerodorf virus. So it has a pretty good disease package even for the central Kansas. So I think beside to fit into the Western Kansas, this also maybe fit into some area in central Kansas. And this year we also already put it in the Kansas performance test in the central. So we will see how it goes, and then we decide where to target in central Kansas. It's pretty sure this will fit Western Kansas with its drought tolerance and the wheat curl mite resistance and the very good yield. And another good feature of that this variety is a straw strands. Actually, this straw strands it's very good to fit into central Kansas. And this variety has good milling and baking quality. So, it is susceptible to wheat streak mosaic virus, but this that's not very important because it has a resistance to wheat coal mite, so it will reduce the coal mite population, and wheat will have less chance to expose to the mites, and then also means less chance to expose to those viruses. So we'll get protected from that mite resistance. So here, this picture, just want to show you the trichome mosaic virus inoculation test in our field. I just took this picture yesterday. You can see on the left actually is the susceptible variety. We didn't see much heads come out. A lot of heads just a lot of tillers might be dead already before the heads come out. All the leaves, I think, have a yellow, that have good symptom on it. Western side, you can see last a few years, we inoculated in the fall, so most of the time showing intermediate reaction. And this year we inoculated a little bit late, and because in the fall the temperature going down very quickly, so it didn't grow much. It's very small, cannot inoculate. We inoculated in the spring, in March, early March. So that's why maybe it's more like moderator resistant from my point of view. But it's just most of the time, if infected in the fall, it's intermediate reaction. And this is for the Western star. And next red one, the last one also is our breeding line. This is our potential 2020 release. Its maturity, height, and the yield performance, and the wheat streak mosaic virus resistance, and also the straw strengths, they're all similar as KS Dallas, but it provides more resistance to stripe rust. It also has a hessing fly resistance. The leaf rust a little bit weak, it's intermediate. So, I mean, yeah, someone may ask me why I need to release this. Most of the traits are similar to KS Dallas. I think because because of that, more resistance to stripe rust. Second is that the wheat streak mosaic virus resistance actually kind of has the same WSN2 major gene, but the minor genes might come from different backgrounds. So I think if we have this release, it will provide more diversity for the wheat streak mosaic virus resistance, and the virus will mutate, and so if we have more diversity, will get broken down, another will have will still stand up, have the chance to still stand up. That's my thoughts. That's why we want to release this one this year, but just another option. And then I think that's all my 5 red varieties, and then I will go next 3 are the white. The first white variety is Joe, and released it in 2015. And I think most of people know this variety very well. It's a medium late and medium tall. It's a #1 white variety in Kansas now. Has very good test weight, and the yield is very good, and I think it's not only good in Kansas, but also did well in Oklahoma, Colorado, and also Texas. Those places, I think some place at least. So it has a very wide adaptation. I think this variety has a very in terms of the yield, is very flexible, kind of very kind of it can hold the yield very well in most of the place. And also it has a very good disease resistance. It resistant to three major diseases in western Kansas: wheat streak, mosaic virus, stripe rust, leaf rust. Also resistant to the powdery mildew. And the wheat streak mosaic virus resistance is similar as Oakley seal, just has a WSM2 gene. Very good winter hardiness. And this year, I'm surprised to see this variety hold very well, even the freeze damage in the northern locations. In the northern locations, normally I see a lot of tillers were killed by the freeze. And this picture I took from Kobe 2 weeks after the, after that freeze, middle April, after freeze almost this. So I took the picture at the end of April. So you can see in the front is a susceptible variety. I think 80-90% of tiller was killed. And then the back, this plot is Joe. Joe actually is, I think I looked all my location, seems like is the variety has the fewest tillers killed. Yeah, if I give a score, I think the front will give a score based on 1 to 9. 9 is the worst. This will be 7 or 8, and Joe will be only, I will give 2. So it's very good. I don't know the reason though. So the straw strength is average, cannot hold too high yield while lodging. And white weight, this white weight, this is susceptible to pre-harvest sprouting. We don't want this trait, but don't have much choice. But it's out there for several years. We didn't see any issue in the field, sprouting issue in the field for last few years. And it is also susceptible to several other diseases like soil-borne acid soil and Hessian fly. So it's better to put in the semi-arid area, not in the high rainfall area. And this is the performance, Joe's performance in the northwest Kansas and the southwest. And I think in the southwest it was similar as Tatanka, but in northwest is kind of a little bit lower, about 5 bushels lower than Tatanka. And Joe had yield advantage over Oakley seal actually in both regions. And compared with another white one from Colorado and Terrell, you can see it has a lot of yield advantage actually. And the second white is called KS Vanada. It's a 2018 release, similar maturity and height. It's good yield in central Kansas, especially south central. Not yield. It didn't yield as good as Joe in the western Kansas. So we are targeting this variety actually for the south central Kansas, because it also has a good disease package, resistant to the stripe rust, leaf rust, soil-borne mosaic, intermediate to scab, barley yield off, and acid soil. And compared to Joe, its straw strength was improved. The sprouting tolerance also improved. And so that's why I think it might fit to south central Kansas. This variety has excellent baking quality, actually. So it's susceptible to wheat streak, powdery mildew, and the Hessian fly. Wheat streak is not a big issue in central Kansas. So the last white variety is KS Lollato. It's a new release from last year. It's medium early and medium short, has good test weight, and the yield, I think yield very good also in central Kansas. in Western Kansas actually yield about 4 bushels fewer than less than Joe. So it has good disease resistance, has resistance to the wheat streak mosaic virus, and also has an intermediate reaction to the triticum mosaic virus. So it can, with this two disease, with this two will provide a good protection to the wheat streak mosaic disease. Has good resistance to leaf rust, and also have soil-borne resistance. Intermediate stripe rust resistance a little bit weak. It's intermediate. So, and also intermediate to acid soil. So in general, it has a kind of a good disease package, even for the central Kansas, and a very good straw strength, and also very good sprouting tolerance. It's almost similar as Danby. We know Danby is very good sprouting tolerance, and excellent, also excellent baking quality, but moderator susceptible to scab and barley yellow dwarf and powder mildew. And so we are targeting this variety for the central Kansas, and but also in western Kansas, because only 3 to 4 bushels less than Joe. We thought because of its a different maturity type, and also its a sprouting tolerance, that's a advantage in western Kansas. If farmers plant Joe, they might consider also plant this to spread the risk of the sprouting, and also spread some labor because maturity difference. So it might be also good for some farmers for in the western Kansas, and also because of the good quality, and if they can find a market, that will be maybe they can even get a premium. So that's, I think, this just table listed the Silverato, the yield performance in last 3 years. It's our own data. It's kind of very, very impressive. 64 bushels and about 2.5 bushels, more than Joe. So it's also very competitive to the other red variety in the central Kansas. So I think that's my last slides, and I would be happy to take any questions if the viewers have any questions.
Very good, Guorong. That's a great report card on the varieties out of your program at Hayes, and congratulations on the advances there. And we will take those questions a little later on for Guorong or Allan or any of our presenters. Guorong Zhang is the wheat breeder at K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes, and we are at the halfway point of our presentation, so we want to bring to your attention here the organizers of this event would like feedback on this virtual format. This is the first time that K-State has attempted a crop field day in this manner, not surprisingly. We'd like to know how this has gone for you as a viewer, and the informative nature of it, the presentation of it, and so forth. So if you would provide that feedback as well as your questions to Lollato at ksu.edu, Lollato at ksu.edu. You can also submit your questions on the YouTube chat or via Twitter at KSU Wheat. Take advantage of the opportunity to ask our presenters anything that you have on your mind, and as far as what they're sharing or anything else regarding wheat production. With us this evening, later on. Next up, we have K-State area agronomist for Northeast Kansas, Stu Duncan. Before we bring Stu in, though, to note that before he moved to the Manhattan office, working out of there for a number of years, Stu logged a long time at K-State's South Central Area Extension Office in Hutchinson. And so he is well versed in wheat performance in the central part of the state. And in fact, that's the topic he's been assigned this evening, to go over variety selection considerations for the central part of Kansas. So without any further ado, let's turn to Stu and see what he has to share with us this evening. Good evening, Stu.
Whoops, where'd I go? Well, good evening, Eric, and everybody out there. I am trying to see if we can get this baby done. Is it coming in, Arthur? It says I'm screen sharing. Okay, got the full Monty there. You don't? How's that? What? Yeah. Well, I thought okay, we'll try that again. Oops, that was nothing. Oh, am I sharing the wrong screen? Just a second. Let's see. I want to do that one. We're ready to go? Okay, just a minor glitch there. Well, good evening and welcome to our virtual wheat tour. Eric, I appreciate that introduction. I've actually been in Northeast Kansas longer than I was in South Central now. This is the longest I've ever lived, except for in Osage County when I grew up. So, but there is the central corridor of Kansas has always been near and dear to me. Boy, things have changed. And especially since I've moved up here, almost half the soybeans in the state are raised in that corridor right now. And unfortunately, for wheat acreage, it's been to its expense. Times change, I guess we do too, but this was one of my favorite tours we did, and it was usually right about this time of year, and it was down in Kingman County. A longtime certified grower, the Conradi family, that was their home place, and I caught that coming in for a tour one night. But we've had an interesting year as we move on into it. I think I will. We want to talk a little bit about the conditions. Dr. Lollato is policing this, I think, too, as well as Arthur Selman, our IT guy that makes this all happen. So if I get too far out of kilter, I'm hoping Romulo's close. I know he's about zoomed out today, but we'll talk a little bit about the conditions, and then we'll talk a little bit about wheat variety. And I did not spell that. I think I borrowed that from somebody else and did not do my spell check, but it is a discussion. So that was the big thing this year, potentially in central Kansas. This is a photo was taken by Jay Wisby, our central Kansas district crop production agent up out of Saline and Ottawa counties. Those are the two counties in that district. Things look pretty bad. About the 20th of April, 22nd, I think this is when Jay took this. And there's that's what we saw a lot of in North Central. What has been exciting to me is that it not only did it look that bad, we still have some really good looking wheat up there. A lot of ours recovered, and for certain reasons, not sure why. Some of it looked real bad. Usually the further northern or western we went in North Central Kansas, which was out of my district, once you got over in that Phillipsburg, Stockton, Smith Center areas, they really had some issues with their crop recovering. But we have come back pretty well in that central part, and there were several reasons for that. But first off, we saw a lot of patterns out there. Was it drill overlap? And I didn't see much of that in this. Was it residue issues that we were dealing with? And sometimes we get into that with a heavy, there were 5.1 acres of wheat in the central part corridor, just in the 19 counties I had up to Ottawa County. in 1998, that number has been cut in half, approximately, or even a little bit more so. So we have changed our cropping systems. We've got a lot more residue out there now. We have some that breaks down faster than others, but straw choppers have become very important. And every once in a while we forget that, or something doesn't work right. We can get a heavy residue cover. That can cause us some problems with soil to seed contact. We just can't get enough down pressure on the drill to cut through some of that stuff. If it's a little bit damp, we see that happen. The further, as you travel around, you'll see these fields, though they are level and uniform, they are not. We have different soil types. We just have a whole lot of different things that we have to deal with sometimes. So we just would see a lot of patterns. Even sometimes just a small low spot would do it, or a higher spot. In this case, it was a low spot if the colder air just happened to settle in. Right up front, again, that moisture, the residue, and the one thing we had this year, and I think one thing that helped our wheat recover, first off, we had fairly decent moisture yet when this happened in the central part of the state. The wheat was with that later planting dates that we have. We now have, we didn't see the wheat developed as far along as it had been in some of those other 3 years. Dr. Fritz talked about the differences in, comparing one year to the next. There were a lot of similarities. There were a lot of differences too. And I think part of that has been our change in cropping system. Shallow planting, again, can sometimes tie into a lot of those things, as well as being in a hurry and trying to get finished before you get done. Just a whole bunch of issues we can get into. And we talk about shallow planting, and some of you don't tell Lucas I stole this out of his presentation last night, but I saw a lot of that, and especially on double crop wheat after a summer crop. And in this case, it was oftentimes soybeans. We still had wheat carcasses there long after, even through the freeze and on beyond, but you could just see they were just lined up and sitting there. So we did, in dry areas, of course, it was worse. Now, those weren't the only things that we need to look out for in central Kansas. Low pH is one of those issues, but when we move further up into north central Kansas, it's generally not a pH factor as much, but Greg McClure in Riley County caught this field. The cooperator caught him, and those of you from Saline County on north, we're seeing more and more of this bright yellow. No, it's not soil-borne mosaic. Almost a thing most folks wouldn't even recognize what soil-borne was anymore. And it kind of looks like nitrogen, but when you get up closer, it's a lot more brilliant yellow. And you can see this is kind of down in a swale where that was at. Oftentimes we'll see this on eroded slopes where there's low organic matter. We got a sandier soil. First saw this type of thing. I saw it in Kingman County once many years ago, but this one can be remedied. This Jay Wisby, that guy is quite a photographer, and he's quite a scouter with his cooperators. We were looking at, he sent some of that, and we talked about that. I think that's a sulfur deficiency, and he sent in some tissue tests, which we can do at our soil testing lab. Worked out very well. They went out and they stripped some. I believe they used ammonium sulfate and just got about 20 to 30 units out there on that field, and you can see the drastic response. This was all done in late March and April. All of this showed up just right away. There are long-term, they need to keep, the north central and central people need to be keeping an eye on that sulfur level. And the only way to check that, of course, is to soil test. So there are several remedies. Work with your county or district crop production agent, and we'll go from there. Now, you're really interested in selecting the best varieties for your operation. And so there are, as things have changed a little bit, we always talked about diversity in our programs as far as a diversity of varieties, maturities, just other physical characteristics. And sometimes now we're working around a few less varieties, but we've got plenty to choose from and a lot of good ones. But there's still some things you need to keep in mind when you're looking at these. One of the best sources I look for disease and insect ratings is the K-State publication MF 991. It's available online. You call your extension agent, but you can get into the K-State Research and Extension site and go find the agronomy link or the crops link, go to agronomy, and it'll be listed under publications. Wheat in the wheat section. Sometimes it's a little cumbersome to get there, but you can. The further south we go, about Saline County on south, some of it in the north, but soil pH can become a big issue, and Dr. Fritz did a really good job talking all of that, getting us in the ballpark. So, we know there are different levels of tolerance. There are some that should scare you a little bit in South Central extreme, but there are also some of the better varieties if we don't have that issue. And again, how would you know what your soil pH was if you didn't soil test? And that's how this whole thing was coming about back in the 1980s. That's when we first were doing our research up here at K-State, and it was down in Cali, Kingman, and I think maybe a bit in Ferguson County as well. So it is a huge issue and has a drastic effect on that wheat. There's several things you can do. Lyman is the long-term long-term fix to that. Sometimes we use Band-Aids like variety selection, starter fertilizer in the furrow with our seed if we have a susceptible variety. A lot of folks do that anyway if they're going for grazing, and some of those varieties are there. But in pH, things like SY Grit, Wolf, and SY Wolf and Wolverine as well. Gallagher can be a bit iffy. WB Grainfield 4303 and 4269. Those are some popular varieties, and so you got to watch your pH to get the full benefit out of those varieties. Our cropping systems again have changed. After corn, I appreciate Allan's assessment of those varieties and getting the barley yellow dwarf tolerance into some of them. It's not like Everest, that's still the flagship. There's several others that are close in behind that. So we want to check that, and all that kind of information is available as well in the wheat book that is published every year, where you can pick that up. After soybeans are grazing or grain sorghum, that is a different issue. Generally, those that have fall grazing potential, those varieties with good fall grazing potential, will work best after soybeans or grain sorghum, simply because they're generally pretty good fall tillerers and they can get you some good cover. That was one of the things with Everest, great after corn, but we didn't like to see it as much going after soybeans or grain sorghum. When folks were double cropping in that north central region with Everest, they were lucky to get an average type of yield out of it. You put it in a situation where it's got the full season so it can develop those fall tillers, which is kind of its forte, then it would perform quite well. So again, considerations to take when you're looking. Not much continuous wheat anymore, but if you're trying that still in our no-till situation, first off, you want to, of course, make sure the volunteers all out of there and dead, but you need to look for a tan spot and other leaf spotting diseases that can be carried on the residue. And we see more of those this year than I had seen in a while. A lot of tan spot. Maybe some of that septoria complex was getting better. If you're looking for a dual purpose wheat that you can graze hard and then still get some grain off if you pull it off in time, very good. We've got several good varieties for that. I think Allan talked about some of those. Dr. Lollato, that was one of his major things when he was still in school down at Oklahoma State. And Oklahoma State breeders have come up with some really good grazers, but so is our private ones. I know Monument is one that comes to mind right away to me, but there are several others out there that have some good growth habits, good ground cover, and also good yield potential. The disease tolerance, again, I referred you back to that MF 991 wheat variety for wheat variety disease and insect ratings. And then another thing we can look at sometimes is tillage system, and I've seen more tillage these last few years, and it's kind of disheartening, especially in that middle part of the state and even further west, simply because of weed control issues for the most part. And that's you want to really keep an eye on those diseases as well there too. And as in those tillage systems, you also got to look out for herbicide carryover and a lot of other issues. So it's wheat growing was never really easy, but it hasn't gotten any easier either as time has rolled on. That central and eastern Kansas package, this is in that MF 991 publication, but those Erick DeWolf, Dr. DeWolf did a great job consolidating these into above average, average, and below average disease package ratings, and would be a combination of all those diseases. And Dr. Fritz, Allan covered a lot of those very well. As he said, if you've got some leaf rust tolerance, that's going to help you. That may even with it's not going to give you stripe rust tolerance, but it allows you to give your fungicide a little bit later shot, maybe if you are prone to, or you're used to using them. If you're resistant to using fungicides, your best bet's to pick something that's got the best overall package for your situation and work through that. There's going to be some weaknesses and little chinks in the armor of all of these, but those are some most popular varieties that we see in the central corridor. This is a patched together table. There's a much better one in the publication. I'm still learning to use Adobe, and I think I finally got where I can edit, but not before I put this together. But the big things I look for in central Kansas are barley yellow dwarf, leaf rust, stripe rust, and Fusarium head blight. Those are generally the ones I worry the most about. They're very still rated in there. Follow the scales that are in there. Usually 1 is best and 9 is worst. And you can see it's hard to find a perfect one, but you can get a conglomeration of some good ratings, and that's what that table on that last page was about. And it's also, again, in this publication. I'm just checking my time, Erick, to see, or Arthur, to see where I'm at. Boy, I thought I had 2 hours, but I guess I'm probably not going to make my full time limit, so that's okay too, I think. I'm going to start at the southern end of the district and move my way up to the Nebraska border. And I've started down in south central Kansas, of course. And, I like to look at a long-term average. And I use the Kansas Variety Performance Test out of the Kansas Wheat Book. I'll tell you what, you can get very good information from the private seedsmen as well, from the companies, Syngenta / AgriPearl, WB those guys, LCS, Lima Grain, all some good information. And it's kind of like watching the news. If I do watch the news, I get it from 3 or 4 sources and then try to meld it together myself. And that's what I recommend folks do too. The yields, the bushels per acre, those can be really flashy, but I've always liked the percentage of average column, simply because it's kind of an easier way for me to tell right off the bat, just running down that percentage of average column, what it did relative to the rest of those varieties in that plot. Now, this is just a compilation that I pulled from 2017, 18, and 19's publications. And as you look through there, you'll see there are several repeat offenders, or several that have done well. I pulled the best ones I could for the most part, at least how they performed at our variety trials. But, and Aaron's going to come on here and beat me up later, probably Allan too. But just to show you where we have what kind of yield potentials we have, and Hutch was a little harder on Larry than I wanted it to be. I think not all the time do we get these things fungicided up. I think if we're pushing and there are some high intensity studies that we do have on some of Allan's sites that they're a lot of work for his crew, but they really work well. And you're going to see a couple of those as we go through. But you'll see some familiar names in there and some that aren't so familiar. But, you know, I put in most everything I could that was above average and over those years. And you can see that things like Bob Dole just kind of was in all 3 of those years. However, we might expect, and of course, this is about the way it works. 3 years, then you have something different happen, and we'll see what happens. But usually we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater just after 1 year. But Bob Dole has been one that's performed very, very well in that area. The reason we look at these and some of these others, and as you look at them, and just one example that I had was I wanted to show you, this is my rough interpretation of the aluminum soil tolerance, red being stuff that just will not tolerate a low pH. And that's probably, if Dr. Lollato is in the audience, if he's got his microphone near, I was going to call on him. I forgot to get him messaged, but the red ones I've got marked through here did very well in some of these years down there at Hutch, but they are also a variety that if you're on a pH soil of 5.5 or below, it's not going to do very well. You could still plant them, but if you knew you had a pH of 5.5, is it worth planting those? And then if you're not used to putting a starter band of phosphate down, is it worth that? I would say the same thing when we get to the rust packages. As that rust package breaks down, you've got to make a decision in there sometime. And you can see we had a variety, you know, let's say Smith's Gold. You know, 107 bushel average in 2017. I don't see it in 2018, but 2019, it's back up there. It's 79 bushel. So we had a wide range in yields as well, but it hung in there 2 out of the 3 years. But that's one. Red means that it just won't stand a low pH. Orange is moderately susceptible, and yellow's kind of an intermediate. Not bad. That's up over 5.6, 5.7 pH. You probably wouldn't see an issue with that. So those are some of the varieties, and there's some really good ones in there that we look at. The 4269, okay, that's in there a couple of times. You can see the old one like 4458, which has been a staple in South Central Kansas and Central Kansas. It has good low pH tolerance. It doesn't have much for leaf rust and now stripe rust either, but now, and so that has caused some issues. You can see another one like WB Grainfield, which is has been one of the two most popular wheats in the state. We caution people planting that on that's kind of an intermediate one, but it's still something you need to keep a lookout for. Cedar is another one of those, and you can see it's only in there once. That's one of those race horses, very early. That's something it's kind of fun to plant. It's great to harvest. It'll go 100 bushel if conditions are right. But the red ones are the ones that you really got to watch on those low pH soils. Orange ones are a caution sign. The yellow ones are kind of intermediate, and the rest of those are pretty okay. So, that can all change. There's a couple I left in there that I really wonder about. Let's say Bentley, this one here from Oklahoma. You're going to see it, and it was developed to be planted out in the Altus, southwest Oklahoma, very dry environments, but it has done very well in parts of Kansas, which really makes me scratch my head, and it's because it's got some good traits to it. I'll leave that up to Dr. Lollato to recommend whether we use that one or not, I guess. But there's a look at what has been going on in Reno County at the Hutch experiment field. Again, a good variety. The Double Stop Plus, the Double Stop CL Plus, that gives you a clear field opportunity if you've got a rye or a downy brome problem. You can use Beyond on those, and you can use the full rates as a 2-gene one. And it's probably one of the best one for at least Highway 56 and south, I think. And it's also very good yielder, very good, pretty good grazing wheat too. So it's got some really nice possibilities. I really like that one. And since they've selected it out so that it is not quite as rough looking as it used to be either. So that's one that surely is worth a look. Smith's Gold's ones I've kind of had to figure a little bit more out about it too, but there's still some solid ones. If you're going after, if you're going to double crop after corn, of course, there's still Everest, there's Zenda, and Zenda fits very well down in that area. Didn't really show as well until 2019 again, but it's always been pretty steady. Also after corn, you're going to see 4269, I think 4699, a new one. SY Benefit from the AgriPearl or Syngenta. And although you don't see that one in these down at Hutch doing quite as well as it did a little further north, which is kind of backwards to what I was thinking. One I'd sure want to see a little more data on is this Green Hammer. We've only got 1 year on it, but that's why you look at a lot of them. Bob Dole fits very well. Paradise is in most of these, but I would not follow corn with that one. So, and then you get the Colorado wheats like Langen. That's very popular further west. We leave that one with Guorong, Zhang, and those guys out at Hayes and West to deal with those. But again, a lot of opportunities. Some we don't have very much information on yet. A little bit on Ag Icon. I know Allan's got the date on that. I just haven't paid that much attention to it because we didn't have it. So that was Hutch. Now we will kick this in gear a little bit so we can get up through the corridor. McPherson is one of those interesting sites where you can see 2019 is missing, and that's because 2019 was missing in McPherson County. The plots were lost, but this one's got just a standalone variety plot, the same varieties with some intensivity to them, which was generally, I believe, 40 units of nitrogen extra there. We pushed those varieties, and there was a couple of fungicide applications on them as well. Kind of funny, some of these respond, and this, as you look at 2017 and 18, again, look for the same varieties. Now you're going to need to go back to that first slide and do your homework and find out which ones are, low pH. This guy right here just isn't going to fit, but it was one of the top yielders top T158. It was a real solid wheat in McPherson County for years. This was pretty steady, and when we had some dry times, because that's a Western Kansas wheat, we did a lot better. But you can see double stop CO plus is in there both years that we did the intensity. The fun thing to look is see how the varieties responded to getting pushed along. I did not put the increase in averages in there. I think with virtual school, I'm going to do like some of the teachers. You're going to have to subtract your yield and see what happened. But sometimes we didn't have much of a response, and sometimes maybe even a negative. I'm not sure why that is. I see that, in 2017, Paradise did not respond to more fertilizer and fungicide, and I'm wondering if that may have caused it to be a little weak in the knees, and maybe we didn't get it all harvested, because that could happen. Monument would do the same thing, though it did see a response. They must have got it all combined up, but that's something we have to watch with Monument. SY Benefit is one that can do a little better with a little pushing along, but some of them just didn't do it. 4458 had a nice increase. That's still a variety I like for that central corridor, as long as you are willing to have a fungicide application figured in your budget, and just be tickled if you don't have to use it, but you probably will with that one anymore. And with some of the others, Gallagher, we're getting a little far north for Gallagher, but it has still performed well in that central part of the state, a little further north than it should, or what we keep telling it should. You can see that they responded really well in 2017. In 2018, really didn't. It was a negative response. So that's why we look at several years and then try to figure it from there. But the McPherson sites, hopefully we'll have that intensive management study site come through again this next year. We're going to go up I-70 or I-135, another county, the Saline County. The plots were planted in 2017 and 2019. It was a tough year to be, 2 tough years to be a wheat plot in Saline County, at least where Allan had his sites at. But again, you can see several of the same varieties you saw further south. I mean, you still had double stop. Now, this one did not have the intense management practices put on it, but you can still see some of those longwords. Again, I would caution you very much, on something like Langen, check your pH before you ever wander into grit. And the same way with SY Wolf, that's another one. You saw in that first slide from Hutch, the SY Wolverine, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. That's a Wolf Everest cross, but it has Wolf's low pH tolerance, which is pretty nothing for the most part. So that one we got to be careful with. You'll see is that we're starting to see the grain field in the Monument. There are varieties that are moving past them in many respects, but those are still 2 very solid wheats. One that has always mystified me has been the Winter Hawk. It likes Saline County and about 2 townships into the surrounding counties, but it does really, really well through there. It has no leaf rust tolerance, but it still had some stripe rust tolerance, and it was a very good quality wheat. I think that's another thing that kind of helped it out a little bit there. But once again, you're seeing Bob Dole showing up quite often. It's just been 3 pretty good Bob Dole years, even though 2 of those 3 years, or one of them, was not very good yields, especially at Hutch. But that's, things have come a long way. But LCS meant I would go with another LCS like Chrome or potentially Link. That one has just been too iffy over the years, up and down. I guess if you like inconsistency, that it's got a very good yield potential, but you really got to keep an eye on it. And again, I wouldn't follow corn with that one either. So you got to, there's several of those in there. Like I said, the ones that will do very well or should anyway would be Everest, Zinda, WB 4269, WB 4699, and SY Benefit are some of our best ones to follow that corn situation. When we get into the following soybeans and grain sorghum potentially, that's where the grain field and the monument really come in and stand out, or the Gallagher as you go further south. And I think the Bob Dole will fit into that role as well. So we have plenty to choose from. It's just a matter of figuring out what the weather's going to do to you for the rest of the year. Ellsworth County had an intensive study sistered up, paired with the regular one, and this is in the same plots. And we're getting in a little bit of a drier area at this point. Oftentimes you'll see the western Kansas wheats work pretty well here. This plot is out. It has been near Lorraine. It is this year anyway. Again, you can see the 2019 yields are not there, and that's because there weren't any. And we got into that situation. That's just the way it was. But you can see again, 2 years in a row, you've got some pretty decent yields to look at. The percent of averages again, we did pretty well with most of them in 2017. We had a few drop a little bit, but there's still some Oklahoma wheats poking in up there. I'm starting to see more of the northern wheats. The AgSeco icon was. You can ask Dr. Fritz about the background on that originally came from the K-State program, but was released through those guys. But it's more of a northern Kansas type of a wheat. I believe the Gallant is you saw robust earlier down south. As you get further north, I think you're going to see more of the Gallant. Chrome and Hot Rod, you'll see those coming to the top quite often, and Paradise has been a pretty solid wheat. Just it did not make it in to Ellsworth County very well, and it's I think the Hot Rod is also from Polanski's up there at Belleville. But okay, 4458 still hanging in there. 4303, that's kind of an interesting wheat. I had it originally, I wasn't too sure about it. It's a large seeded one, kind of like Bob Dole's large seeded. Make sure you check your seed size, and the later you plant, the kind of the heavier you're going to want to go with your seed, but make sure you get it out there. It's a large seeded one. It's got a short blocky head. When you put it under intensive management, it can run. It did a pretty good run in Ellsworth in 2017. And I don't have it. I don't see where it was in 2018. So I may have botched a slide up here. But that is one that will respond to high intensive management. So it's one to keep an eye on and one to take a look at. It's been around 3 years now, and has had some good yields for us. The Monument and Grainfield are still pretty solid a long way across the state, simply because they have a lot of that ability to tiller in the fall, and then they will also want to. They will move on into final grain field. I think I goofed up and I have gone way over time. I thought I started earlier. Mitchell County, you'll want to check those out too. Belleville, we run it all the way up the state through that central corridor. You're going to see a lot of the same varieties all the way through when you go up there that are going to be in that top yielding bit. But that's pretty much. I'm going to wrap it up with that, because that's you've got a long list. If you come back and check this out, and you can find several of those. You're going to find many of those varieties. You got some choices. I think I misspoke on the hot rod. I think that was an Agseco, and Rockstar is the other one that we can find at Lansing. So I'm done, Arthur.
Okay, Stu, thanks. Stu Duncan,
Eric, whoever.
area agronomist for K-State, and
I can take another.
his we'll get all these technicalities worked out. His data is, of course, available if you would like to contact him at northeast.ksu.edu. Stu can share the information he wasn't able to get to right there, but he has a wealth of good input for you Central Kansas producers on variety selection and the multitude of things to consider there. So take advantage of that. Again, this is last call for questions you might have. We do have 2 or 3 questions in the queue, and we want to get to those, but we would accept a couple of more if you can get them in quickly. YouTube chat at KSU Wheat on Twitter, or email Romulo at ksu.edu. Well, to round out our formal part of the program, we've invited in the Vice President of Research and Operations with the Kansas Wheat Commission, Harries. Of course, the commission has been very generous over the years in supporting wheat research at Kansas State University. And what we've invited Aaron to do this evening is give a brief status report on that research support and on the wheat growers in Kansas are very commendable for everything they've done in that respect, and we're looking forward to the next iterations of that support. So, Aaron, if you would share that with us briefly here.
Hey, thank you, Eric, and I'm pleased to be here this evening. Thanks for the invitation. If you've been with us the last couple of nights, you certainly understand that the pool of wheat expertise at Kansas State University is second to none in the United States or the world for that matter. So from a wheat grower perspective, we're very excited to have that kind of talent. So I'll take just a few minutes this evening to brief everybody on where we are in terms of funding wheat research through the wheat checkoff. And again, Kansas Wheat is the Wheat Commission and an association of wheat growers working together. Established in 1957, the Wheat Commission is that checkoff entity that collects 2 pennies on every bushel of wheat sold in the state of Kansas. And we use that obviously for research as well as international and domestic marketing purposes. So the funding sources for wheat research in the state of Kansas really are a 3-legged stool. We have the Kansas Wheat Commission, which is the checkoff dollars, the Kansas Wheat Alliance, which collects royalties on certified seed varieties marketed through K-State. And then the Kansas Wheat Commission established a research foundation several years ago, and we accept gifts from donors, donations from individuals and businesses who support wheat research. So it's kind of a 3-legged stool. And we fund a little bit of everything. Obviously, the core of what we fund with checkoff dollars is variety development, but tied into that, spokes on that wheel, obviously, are agronomics, genetic, pest management, improving the quality of wheat, as well as new technology, scanning, testing procedures. So it's a very diversified area of wheat research. Our priorities from a board are not a surprise. We focus on research initiatives that share profitability to the entire market chain. I think what I really want to emphasize, though, is the Kansas Wheat Commission Board of Directors strongly believes in maintaining a strong public wheat breeding program at K-State. You just can't pull the plug on a wheat breeding program, that pipeline, and start it up again the next day. So through the Wheat Commission, we strongly support that public breeding program at K-State. So we spend from the checkoff dollars about $1.2 to $1.3 million every year on research. The core of that is, again, variety development, about 40%, but then it's evenly split between genetics, disease, agronomics, and quality. So we try to get everything that ties into the core wheat breeding program that benefits the public breeding program, but also research that benefits a lot of the private breeding programs that are out there. There are factors that affect wheat quality. Not only do we look at yield, we have to look at quality. Genetics, agronomics, and weather are all important part of that. This chart does a nice job of illustrating just how the weather impacts the wheat crop in Kansas. The red line there is our protein. The black line is yield. And that little purple trend line is our protein trend line. And really what we're trying to focus on is not only an increasing yields, which we're always shooting for, but to increase that protein trend line and start getting higher protein crops in Kansas. We do fund different tools that can reach us to that end. Gene editing is a technology that a lot of you probably heard about, CRISPR-Cas9 technology. The Wheat Commission through the checkoff is funding gene editing research at K-State through Dr. Edward Ochenov. Just an example of what he can do. This shows how if you knock out one gene, you can increase the size of the wheat kernel. So on the top there, you've got an unedited line. On the bottom, you've got an edited line, and you can see how the kernel size increases in those. So those are the types of possibilities with gene editing. We're working with Romulo on a project that he's working on about fertilizer, how that translates into quality. This is the team from agronomy at K-State and also USDA here in Manhattan. What they're working on is demonstrating that nitrogen and sulfur are critical elements, not only in yield, but also in producing high protein and quality wheat. Particularly that sulfur emphasis is really something that's kind of cutting edge research, how sulfur can increase yield, but also not only increase protein in wheat, but increase the quality of that protein. So a lot of things are possible in research. It's really an exciting time in wheat research. I think we're in the golden age of wheat research. We can look for higher yield, higher quality, changing the flavor of wheat, possibly making wheat that is lower glycemic index. And we're always looking at drought tolerance, disease tolerance, making wheat more photosynthesis efficient, more fertilizer use efficient. So everything we can do to increase the profit margin of our wheat farmers in the state. We've got a lot of challenges. Research funding on the state and federal level is decreasing, but farmers took a big step when they built the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center in 2012 in Manhattan. This is a farmer-owned, farmer-built research facility in Manhattan. If you haven't been there yet, we certainly invite everyone to visit at some point in time. This research facility complements the research capacity at Kansas State University, adds on to that capacity, and there's really nothing else like it in the nation. It's got growth rooms inside, it's got greenhouse space, it's really a full-scale wheat research facility. And then, as I mentioned before, we're always looking for other sources of funding for research. We've initiated a Fields Forward campaign for our Wheat Commission Research Foundation. Our goal is to raise another $4 million outside of the checkoff to help fund some research that goes on in the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center. And as of today, we're about halfway towards that $4 million mark. So that's just a quick snapshot of what's going on through the Kansas Wheat Commission. Please consider us a resource. Contact our office at any time, go to our website, and we wish everybody a very productive and very safe wheat harvest coming up.
All right, Aaron, thank you. And that is at KSU, or kswheat.com rather. kswheat.com is the Kansas Wheat website if you'd like to contact Aaron and his colleagues there about wheat research support for Kansas State University out of the commission and Kansas Wheat. We do want to get to a couple of questions here before we have to round out the program. And the first question that we have goes like this. On average, how many days can you expect a fungicide application to last? Now, our plant pathologists who would normally answer that question were on last night, so they're not available this evening, but let's see if there's anybody on the panel who'd like to take that on. Who would like to address that? Stu?
I think Allan Fritz would.
Or Allan?
Okay.
I'm saying 21 to 28 days, but I'm going to listen to Allan.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. It depends a little bit on the disease. So there are some diseases for which it will go away a little faster. So like, I think the tan spot, it usually doesn't work quite as long. So there's some that are in that kind of that 14-day range. But for our rusts that we're normally trying to control, we're pretty much in that 21-day range. So if you think we normally have a 25 to 29-day grain fill period and you put on the fungicide a few days before flowering, we do run out a little bit before the end of the crop. So yeah, about 21 days, I think, is what Erick DeWolf would probably say, what I've heard him say before anyway.
Yeah, very good.
Weather dependency will happen there too. I mean, just the weather can mess with you too there, but that's about right.
And the product, that you put on can have some effect as well.
Sure.
And this other question is for you, Allan. It refers to those two new releases that are expected out of the program this fall. Where are they best suited? North Central Kansas or South Central Kansas or Eastern Kansas? You may have addressed that in your presentation, but just to hit that real quickly.
Sure. I would say probably I'm not super comfortable with either one of them in far eastern Kansas because of the scab susceptibility and the probability that we'll see scab in the eastern third of the state. The 049K8, I'm pretty comfortable with north to south. It's done really well throughout the entire central corridor. Been good on no-till after beans. The tillering capacity really helps it out there. Probably a little bit early on the early end for where we'd want things in north central, but it's yielded really well there. The 15688, I would say I'm more comfortable with it probably south of I-70. Even though it's a later variety, its performance has just been a little bit better in the southern part of the state. It's certainly not bad in the northern part of the state, but I like the 049K a little bit better north of 70.
Okay. All right. And another question, this would be for Aaron. This individual would like to know a little bit more about how wheat research support stands given the lower wheat acres in Kansas.
Well, that's a really good question, and we've seen very good support, especially from the private industry and private donors for our research foundation. But we do have to be cognizant of reduced acres. You know, the funding for research comes as reflected in the crop size, so it's 2 cents per bushel, and depending on how many bushels we grow. But our commissioners are really committed, even if our budget shrinks, to maintaining the level of funding research we have recently, just to keep that program going, again, supporting that public breeding program. So we're getting creative and finding ways, but we intend to fund from a commission standpoint of keeping that research pipeline full as long as we're able to. And we've been getting a lot of support, more and more support from the industry. So I think there's all around investment from a lot of different sectors.
Very good. Well, we have a brief minute here actually for one more question. Do any of the panelists have a question for anybody else within the group here? Don't everybody jump up at once. Everybody answered everybody's question. Okay. Oh, there is a question now.
It's for me, yeah.
Yes.
Looks like.
Let me repeat it, Guorong. How much benefit does 21 versus 18C give to Dallas against wheat streak mosaic virus? Would you go ahead and address that? Yeah.
Yeah, the benefit, I think I briefed a little bit in my presentation, because the 18C resistance, if it's a warm, the fall weather is very warm, then it's very easy to break down. So resistance becomes susceptible. So that means, lost the resistance. But 21, that means hold a few more degrees. So even the weather a little bit warmer, maybe still hold that resistance. So, and especially for some weight, like if they want to plant earlier, they might have more this kind of breakdown problem. So they would prefer some resistance with a higher temperature.
Yeah. Very well. Well, that ends our opportunities for asking questions directly, for our time will be short here very quickly, but we would invite our viewers to take advantage of filing any further questions that come to mind either right away or later on down the line, and our group can answer those at a later time, but send those as well to Romulo Lollato's email. That's at lollato@ksu.edu. Again, lollato@ksu.edu. We do want to thank our presenters this evening once again, K-State wheat breeders Allan, Fritz, and Guorong, Zhang, also K-State area agronomist Stu Duncan, and once more from the Kansas Wheat Commission, Aaron Harries. Also want to thank our technician Arthur Selman, who's been behind the scenes managing the technical side of this live broadcast. A great deal of preparation went into making this happen, so thanks, Arthur, for that. The broadcasts from both last evening and this evening are archived. This one will be very shortly on YouTube. So simply go to YouTube and search for K-State Virtual Wheat Field Day. And then that'll take you right to those sites, and you can watch these at your leisure should you choose. And we would welcome very much, again, feedback from you viewers on this format. what you liked about it, what maybe could be shored up, whatever it might be, and send those to Lollato at ksu.edu. So we'll know how to proceed the next time we conduct a virtual field day of this type. And there's a good chance that will happen somewhere on down the line. So once again, thanks to you for tuning in. We hope this has been a benefit to you, wheat producers and other interested parties, as we've talked about wheat development, wheat management the last couple of days on this Kansas State University 2020 virtual wheat field day. Erick Atkinson here bidding you a good evening from the campus of Kansas State University.